Hello everyone, this is Reverend Dr. Roger Paul, and tonight we're going to study paper 80, Andite expansion into the Orient,
Into the acid.
into the Occident, I'm sorry. And that starts on page 889.1 or paper 8009. Okay. Rodney, would you like to pray and get us started tonight?
Oh, sure. Father, we're thankful once again for this opportunity that we have to come together tonight to share this revelation in the study of this paper 80 on the anti-expansion in the Occident. We pray for better understanding of these truths so that we might share them with other people. And we do all this in your name, Father. Amen.
Amen. Paper 80. Andite expansion into the Occident. Although the European blue man did not of himself achieve a great cultural civilization, he did supply the biologic foundation which, when its atomized strains were blended with the later Andite invaders, produced one of the most potent stocks for the attainment of aggressive civilization ever to appear on Urantia since the time of that of the violet race and their Andite successors. So what are they talking about here? They're talking about the blue man that's extinct now. It's been blended in with everyone else. And the mixing of the atomized strains with the blue man. All right, and we're going to study that at length. Oh, I didn't change the slide, did I? Well, since I didn't, I want to show you all this chart too. At the beginning of the slides is a chart and it breaks down all the different colored races. And this is from the Don Estes chart. All right, look at that at your leisure. Let's see if I can get this to change. Oh, this is not working. There we go. So the next slide. Millie, would you take the next one?
Did you say Millie?
Yes, please.
The modern white peoples incorporated the surviving strains of the endemic stock, which became admixed with the Sangit races. Some red and yellow, but more especially the blue. There is a considerable percentage of the original Adonite stock in all the white races, and still more of the early Nodite strains.
All right, so the white races ended up with the Andinite stock. Remember Andine and Fanta, and the Adamite stock and some of the Nodite strains. And we know where the Nodites came from, right? The land of Nod. And okay, let's go on to the next.
Hey, Roger.
Yeah.
Unless I missed something, being late or whatever, in the previous paper that we read, isn't this the first time that the white has been
Mentioned? No, it was mentioned a couple times in the other earlier papers, but they didn't go into great length like they did in this paper about it.
okay? No. We're talking about the Caucasian, right?
Right.
Okay.
Okay, Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. Number one, the Adamites enter Europe. Before the last Andites were driven out of the Euphrates Valley, many of their brethren had entered Europe as adventurers, teachers, traders, and warriors. During the earlier days of the violet race, the Mediterranean
Trough.
trough, thank you, was protected by the Gibraltar Isthmus and the Sicilian land bridge. Finland's very early maritime commerce was established on these inland lakes, where blue men, excuse me, from the north and the Saharians from the south met Nodites and Adamites from the east.
Okay, so they're coming in from the different locations, right?
In the eastern trough of the Mediterranean, the Nodites had established one of their most extensive cultures, and from these centers had penetrated somewhat into southern Europe, more especially into northern Africa. The broad-headed Nodites, Andite Syrians, very early introduced pottery and agriculture in connection with their settlements on the slowly rising Nile Delta. They also imported sheep, goats, cattle, and other domesticated animals, and brought in greatly improved methods of metalworking. Syria then being the center of that industry.
Okay, notice they mentioned the pottery and the metalworking again, and this is way before what we are hearing from these TV shows and stuff. When metalworking actually started to take place, they thought it was like 4,000 to 8,000 years ago, right? So
And I was about to ask, what time period is this?
this is all right. They're talking about the Nodites brought in pottery and metalworking, and we know the Nodites were the descendants of whom? They were the descendants of the Calagasta 100, right? So that would have been 250,000 years ago.
Oh, man.
Okay, so they knew about metalworking and pottery, and of course they would have passed that information down to their descendants over time. So pottery working and metalworking did not start 8,000 or 30,000 years ago like everybody speculates. It started much earlier than that. All right.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Interesting.
Okay, for more than 30,000 years, Egypt received a steady stream of Mesopotamians who brought along their art, culture, and enriched that of the Nile Valley. But the ingress of large numbers of the Sahara peoples greatly deteriorated the early civilization along the Nile, so that Egypt reached its lowest culture level some 15,000 years ago. Now this was way before the pyramids, right? All right. Well, work one time and not the other. All right. Millie.
But during earlier times, there was little to hinder the westward migration of the Adamites. The Sahara was an open grazing land overspread by herders and agriculturalists. The Saharians never engaged in manufacture, nor were they city builders. They were an indigo black group, which carried extensive strains of the extinct green and orange races, but they received a very limited amount of violet inheritance for the upthrust of land and the shifting water-laden winds. Before the upthrust of land and the shifting water-laden winds dispersed the remnants of this prosperous and peaceful civilization.
Okay, and that's because they were cut off from other colored people, right? They were not cut off from the green or the orange race, but they were cut off from the violet race, so they did not get much of the violet blood.
They didn't get much of the violence, but they were a peaceful civilization.
They were a peaceful civilization, and that they inherited from the orange race and the green race. Both of those races were more peaceful.
I would have thought that the violet strain would have been peaceful.
Well, you would think so, because they were the children of Adam and Eve, right?
How you doing tonight, Rodney?
There you are, Ted.
Hey,
Okay.
Good.
I apologize, I'm running late, so
I was a little late too.
I'm glad to be here.
All
We
right.
have you too.
Tim, we're on 880, paper 80, the first section, paragraph 5.
Okay.
I'm on page 890.
890.1.
Top of page 890, Adam's blood.
Adam's blood. There we go.
Yes, I've been here since section 1 you guys started reading.
Oh, okay. All right. So would you take the next one then, Adam's
Sure, I'd
blood?
be happy to.
Yeah.
Adam's blood had been shared with most of the human races, but some secured more than others. The mixed races of India and the darker peoples of Africa were not attractive to the Adamites. They would have mixed freely with the red man had he not been far removed in the Americas. And they were kindly disposed toward the yellow man, but he was likewise difficult of access in faraway Asia. Therefore, when actuated by either adventure or altruism, or when driven out of the Euphrates Valley, they very naturally chose the union with the blue races of Europe.
Okay, and that's the strain of the violet blood mixed with the blue races, and that's the ancestors of the white or the Caucasian races. Okay? Alright, so that's where the white races got some of that blood. Next to my cotton thread. Oops, too far. Here? Oh, no, Rodney, you're next. Almost skipped a little.
The blue men, then dominant in Europe, had no religious practices which were repulsive to the earlier migrating Adamites. And there was great sex attraction between the violet and the blue races. The best of the blue men deemed it a high honor to be permitted to mate with Adamites. Every blue man entertained the ambition of becoming so skillful and artistic as to win the affection of some Adamite woman. And it was the highest aspiration of a superior blue woman to receive the attention of an Adamite.
Okay, so the blue men then in Europe didn't have any religious practices, okay, which really repulsed the Adamites, but they were attracted to the Adamites and the Adamites to them. So that's how they ended up intermingling.
I don't understand the phrase honor to be permitted to mate with the Adamites. Were there rules about who could breed with other?
Yeah, Millie, because it was a tribal society, and the tribe would not allow mixing outside the tribe without the permission of the elders of the tribe. So that's what they're talking about. They had to get permission from the elders of the tribes to be able to mix outside their own race.
These people are reacting like real people today, and so I have a hard time remembering. These are tribal people.
Yeah, that's right.
They're not 21st century people.
That's right.
Hey, Roger,
Uh-huh.
were the Adamites a violet color, and then you have the blue man, which is a white man?
Yeah.
So what color were the Adamites? A violet?
Well, yeah, they're more of a violet color, which would probably look not that much different than the blue man. You know, we're talking about skin hues. You know,
So you could distinguish.
yeah,
easily.
you could distinguish, but it was not. You know, they weren't blue as you would consider like the Blue Man Group in Las Vegas or anything like that.
Yeah, the band members.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what I always imagined.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't have like any type of scientific like background, you're gonna. Yeah, I thought that too, right? It's like, what? The blue, orange? What were these people?
Yeah. No, you're talking about slight hue variations. You know, it's just like
yeah.
the red men when the white men came over from Europe and they started calling them red men. That's because when they got sunburned, they had a reddish look to them. But you know that a red man, I mean an Indian, is not really red. He's more of a darker Caucasian almost. He's like a dark, in between the darker and a lot like a Hispanic. You know, many Hispanic people look like the early.
But your green man would be probably a little green.
Yeah, just a slight hue of green, and
Mhm.
you're talking about people like of the Italy, the Mediterranean, places like that. You know, so. And if you look at people, as you study people through the years, you start to notice these slight hues that they've passed down through the ages. You know, even the yellow man doesn't look yellow if you think about it, right? The Orientals, they look like Caucasians with a little bit different hue, right? And it was the same way with the Indians. You know, when the yellow man ran the Indians off the Asian continent across the land bridge, they probably did not look that much different other than the slight hue of color, right? And we got to remember this is a tribal situation, so that's what they're talking about here.
Oh, Roger,
Yeah,
all these different races, the blue man, green and orange and whatever,
right.
they all have red blood, right?
Yeah, they all have red blood. That's right.
Okay.
They do. People are pretty much basically the same. Remember, all the races came from the same family, the same bloodline.
Yeah, I just want to
Yeah.
clear that
And
up.
an interesting thing too, if when they talk about the indigo races have such a wide variety of men. You know, everything from very light, almost Caucasian colored black men to very, very, very dark black men. You know, and depending on what area they stayed in and how pure they stayed within their tribe, ended up determining how brown or how dark they were, right? And it's the same way in India. India has very dark men and they have very light men too. So it works all right. Okay. I think you're right here.
Slowly, these migrating sons of Eden united with the higher types of the blue race, invigorating their cultural practices while ruthlessly exterminating the lingering strains of Neanderthal stock. This technique of race blending, combined with the elimination of inferior strains, produced a dozen or more vile and progressive groups of superior blue men, one of which you have denominated the Cro-Magnons.
Okay, remember the Cro-Magnons had very distinct foreheads, very distinct look, right? And these were descendants of the blue men too, right?
So the Cro-Magnons are what?
Have very distinct brows, the Cro-Magnons, and they look a little almost backwards compared to the other races. But they are descendants of some of the blue men also, right? That's what I was saying. Okay. I guess I'm up. For these and other reasons, not the least of which was more favorable paths of migration, the early waves of Mesopotamian culture made their way almost exclusively to Europe. And it was these circumstances that determined the descendants of the modern European. Oh, and antecedents. Circumstances that determined the antecedents of modern European civilization. Millie, I think you're up.
She just got a.
I'm back, and I just had turned over here later. Because this thing that I'm getting ready to read, I have highlighted some things in there.
Oh, okay.
I think. Climatic and geologic changes. The early expansion of the violet race into Europe was cut short by certain rather sudden climatic and geologic changes. With the retreat of the northern ice fields, the water-laden winds from the west shifted to the north, gradually turning the great open pasture regions of Sahara into barren desert. This drought dispersed the smallest statured brunette, dark-eyed but long-headed dwellers of the great Sahara Plateau.
Now, why would that be? because of the drought, they would not have ready access to certain fruits and vegetables and things to eat. And even the cattle wouldn't have food, right? Because you don't have grasslands, you don't have food for cattle. So what they have to do, they had to shift, right? And they migrated to other areas. And
This is the first time I've seen them talk about dark-eyed, long-headed dwellers.
yeah,
That's, you know, they're describing their features.
right.
Long-headed, as opposed to round-headed, which they do mention elsewhere.
Yeah, and if you think about it, the Sumerians, if you think about the carvings and stuff that they dig up from Sumerian and the descendants of the Sumerians, they were long-headed too. Remember?
There's no hair left, so you don't know they were brunettes. Long-headed dwellers, but they're brunettes.
They're brunette.
They're not the blonde and the blue eyes.
Right. They would be dark eyes and brunette instead of the blonde-haired and blue-eyed. You know, the blonde-haired and blue-eyed would be indication of the violet descendants, right? Like Adam and Eve.
Right.
You know, I once heard a woman talk about how she went to Israel and how she said the Jewish people were just so small in stature that they had, like, you know, the clothing was just really small.
Yeah.
I like how they put small stature in there.
Where we go with their feedback?
I think that the Israelites of today will grow because what you're seeing now is the results of their survival after World War II, where they were carving out a land for themselves
Yeah.
and trying to find the foodstuffs to eat and the medical care and things like that. I think a whole generation or two kind of limped along.
Yeah.
And now that they are very, very well settled and progressive, I'm sure that the young people are getting well fed and well trained. And I think that particular strain will increase in size.
Yeah. I think it will over time too. By the way, Tim, we watched that. What was the name of that movie?
Getting feedback.
Real bad feedback now. We'll see if it's still.
Yeah, I think it's weird.
Gosh, I hope this is not going to be another Skype experience.
That's bad connection. I can hear myself.
Okay, we had that problem to begin with. I spoke in echoes.
Oh,
I can hear myself.
Then maybe unmute your mic. Okay, how's that?
If he mutes his mic, he can't hear himself at all.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm not hearing the feedback now.
Yeah, okay.
What's going
I don't
on?
either.
I don't know, but it's going.
It's
Must
the
be somebody.
gremlins, it's just the gremlins, don't worry about it.
Yeah. We had this problem on Skype.
Yeah.
Okay, who's up next?
I believe I had a comment, but I don't remember what it was.
You want me to take it?
I think you're up next.
I
Tim.
think it's,
The pure indigo elements move southward to the forest of Central Africa, where they have ever since remained. The more mixed groups spread out in three directions. Superior tribes to the west migrated to Spain, and thence to adjacent parts of Europe, forming the nucleus of the later Mediterranean long-headed brunette races. The least progressive division to the east of the Sahara Plateau migrated to Arabia, and thence through northern Mesopotamia and India to faraway
Silent.
Ceylon. The central group moved north and east to the Nile Valley and into Palestine.
Okay, so that shows you the migrations of all the indigo races there.
So when they say the brunette races, we just got done reading. Who were those people again?
Well, they're a mixture.
That's
Of
Syrians?
Huh?
Was it the Syrians that were the brunette races? We just got
Yeah,
done
the
reading?
Syrians were the brunette range, long-haired the brunette Syrians. Yeah, that was just the brunette races. So now remember, all these races have intermixed at length since all this happened. So it's hard to find the pure lines of any of these things, just the remnants of what's left, right?
So we also have to keep in mind this was 250,000 years ago, and our
Right,
planetary prince was on Urantia,
right,
well established with his fortress, and
yeah, yeah.
and these people were basically outside that, right? Just
That-
all over the world.
Yeah, they were outside that. It was all over the world. That's right. All right. Rodney, I think you're next.
Here's a secondary single substratum that suggests a certain degree of kinship among the modern people scattered from the Decca through Iran, Mesopotamia, and along both shores of the Mediterranean Sea. The Karen
You see how it always comes back to these basic races we keep mentioning? Like the Sangic races. Dear?
About the time of these climatic changes in Africa, England separated from the continent, and Denmark arose from the sea, while the isthmus of Gibraltar, protecting the western basin of the Mediterranean, gave way as a result of an earthquake, quickly raising this inland lake to the level of the Atlantic Ocean. Presently, the Sicilian land bridge submerged, creating one sea of the Mediterranean connecting it with the Atlantic Ocean. This cataclysm of nature flooded scores of human settlements and occasioned the great loss of life by flood in all the world's history.
Okay, so that was a really bad flood. All civilizations has legends of floods, right? But this was a real flood that took out a large amount of the population when this happened.
So,
It didn't flood the whole planet.
Roger,
Yeah,
so the Mediterranean was a large lake.
Yeah,
Because of that,
the Mediterranean,
and then it became the sea.
right, it connected with the Atlantic, right? And became part of the Atlantic Sea. So that's how the Mediterranean Sea got started, right? All right. Now, also remember, this is when the Sicilian land bridge went underwater. And so all those migrating from Asia across the from the Sicilian land bridge into Europe, it was no longer there for them to travel into, right? So that's a big thing.
Hmm.
All right, dear?
I just read
Oh, okay. This engulfment of the Mediterranean basin immediately curtailed the westward movements of the Adamites, while the great influx of Saharians led them to seek outlets for their increasing numbers to the north and the east of Eden. As the descendants of Adam journeyed northward from the valley of the Tigris and Euphrates, they encountered mountainous barriers and then expanded Caspian Sea. And for many generations, the Adamites hunted, herded, and tilled the soil around their settlements scattered throughout Turkestan. What else is in Turkestan? Göbekli Tepe.
Is it the Lake of Van?
Yeah, and the Lake of Van also. That's right. Slowly, this magnificent people extended their territory into Europe. But now the Adamites enter Europe from the east and find the culture of the blue man thousands of years behind that of Asia, since this region had been almost entirely out of touch with Mesopotamia. So the blue man had its own culture going for thousands of years all by itself, right? Because they were out of touch with everybody else.
You know what else happened during that time in Turkey, Roger?
What?
You know what else happened in Turkey in 325?
What?
The Council of Nicaea.
That's
Oh, my
right.
goodness.
That's right.
Yep. That's where everybody got together and figured out, well, it's time to figure out who Christ is.
Yeah. Billy, I think you're up next.
The Cro-Magnoid blue man. The ancient centers of the culture of the blue man were located along all the rivers of Europe, but only the Somme now flows in the same channel which it flowed during pre-glacial times.
And that's why you'll find the bones there too, right?
I need to find out where that river is.
Yeah, right through Europe.
The Somme is a very important river in Europe today.
Oh, where is it?
And that's why they find fossils from the Cro-Magnon man.
Like what part?
I
Oh,
think it's in France.
In
Where is
some,
the Somme? I'll have to look that up.
you know,
It just sounds like it should be in France.
yeah. Tim, I believe you're up next.
While we speak of the blue man as pervading the European continent, there were scores of racial types. Even 35,000 years ago, the European blue races were already a highly blended people carrying strains of both red and yellow. While on the Atlantic coastlands and in the regions of present-day Russia, they had absorbed a considerable amount of Andite blood, and to the south were in contact with the Saharan peoples. But it would be fruitless to attempt to enumerate the many racial groups.
So the blue man added to the Russian characters, right? All the Russian groups, but pretty much everybody across the continent over time, right? That's why they're extinct today, because they've been mixed with everyone else. All right, Rodney, would you take the next one, please?
yeah, of course. By the way, I just looked that river up. The Somme,
Yeah.
and it flows like east and west through the northern part of France.
All right.
Hmm.
From east to west
Oh,
in the northern part
I
of France.
think it flows to the west,
From east to west.
horizontal.
Yeah.
It flows into the
Yeah.
Yeah, I think in France they found a lot of Cro-Magnon fossils. That's how.
Interesting. Okay, the European civilization of this early post-Adamic period was a unique blend of the vigor and art of the blue man with the creative imagination of the Edomite. The blue men were a race of great vigor, but they greatly deteriorated the cultural and spiritual status of the Edomites. It was very difficult for the latter to impress their religion upon the Cro-Magnoids because of the tendency of so many to cheat and to defraud the natives. Yeah. For 10,000 years, religion in Europe was at a low ebb as compared with the developments in India and Egypt.
They just weren't interested in religion, right?
The blue men were perfectly honest in all their dealings and were wholly free from the sexual vices of the mixed Adamites. They respected maidenhood, only practicing polygamy when war produced a shortage of males.
So they practiced single mating. These Cro-Magnon peoples were a brave and far-seeing race. They maintained an efficient system of child culture. Both parents participated in these labors, and the services of the older children were fully utilized. Each child was carefully trained in the care of the calves.
Caves.
Caves, I'm sorry. caves, and in art and in flint making. At an early age, the women were well versed in the domestic arts and in crude agriculture, while the men were skilled hunters and contagious warriors.
Courageous.
I'm sorry, courageous warriors. They were probably contagious too.
A little tired tonight, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a little tired. Millie, would you take the next one, please?
Yes. The blue men were hunters, fishers, and food gatherers. They were expert boat builders. They made stone axes, cut down trees, erected log huts, partly below ground, and roofed with hides. And there are peoples who still build similar huts in Siberia. The southern Cro-Magnons generally lived in caves and grottos.
So this was your cavemen, right? Cro-Magnon.
It was smart to put these log huts partially below ground. It's
Yeah.
cold down there.
It's awesome.
If it's above ground, you're exposed to the atmosphere and the winds and the cold. If it's below ground, it's pretty moderate.
Yeah.
Might be cold, but it's still not as cold as that.
Yeah. Tim, would you take the next one? You out there, Tim?
Yes, it was not uncommon during the rigors of winter for their standing on night guard at cave entrances to freeze to death. They had courage, but above all, they were artists. The Adamic mixture suddenly accelerated creative imagination. The height of the blue man's art was about 15,000 years ago, before the days when the darker skinned races came north from Africa through Spain.
That's why you have cave paintings too, right? Rodney, would you take the next one?
Okay. About 15,000 years ago, the alpine forests were spreading extensively. The European hunters were being driven to the river valleys and to the seashores by the same climatic coercion and had turned the world's happy hunting grounds into dry and barren deserts. As the rain winds shifted to the north, the great open grazing lands of Europe became covered by forests. These great and relatively sudden climatic modifications drove the races of Europe to change from open space hunters to herders, and in some measure to fixers and tellers of the story.
I want to mention something here that y'all would find very interesting. There's a National Geographic has a show. It's called The Days Before.
Oh, are you talking
What
about
was the name of The Days Before?
Columbus?
Christopher Columbus.
1 year before.
The years before.
Yeah,
Christopher.
1491.
Yeah. And what's interesting about it was it talks about how different people migrated to different areas and where different things started and ended. One of the interesting things we found out was all potatoes that, you know, is well known in Europe now, they came from the Andes, from ships going down to South America and bringing them back and planting them in Europe. The other thing that was interesting is how almost all of Europe at one time almost defoliated the whole continent. Okay, they cut down almost all the trees for fuel, you know, for fires, campfires, building, things like that. And what happened is when people started migrating to America, that's what happened to a good part of America too. They started chopping down trees to build campfires and fires for their stoves at home and things like that. And it almost destroyed all the forest. And so this show was really interesting, and it fits right into what it's talking about right here, where it talks about Europe had become covered in forest, right? And then a few hundred years later, they almost cut all the trees down, you know. So it's really interesting. It's funny how well it fits in with what it teaches us in the narration.
What was the name of that?
It's called the years before Christopher Columbus. I think it's the years before. I don't think it was the year before. I think it was the years before Christopher Columbus. And it talks about how all food sources, where they came from, a lot of them came from America, how the horses got back in America. You know, America was covered in horses before the red man arrived, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because of the glaciers and stuff, they almost became extinct, and then the Europeans, or well, basically the Spanish, brought Mustangs back to America and then repopulated America with horses. But it just talks about all the different animal groups that had been used up and remigrated and that sort of thing, and how they got in America and how they got to Europe too. So it's very interesting.
Yeah, the seeds and the hog. Christopher Columbus brought over with him 10
10 hogs, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, he brought 10, Christopher Columbus brought 10 hogs when he came to America, and those became the whole population of wild boar in America.
Yeah, 'cause they didn't run.
Yeah, so it's just real interesting.
And potatoes came from where?
All potatoes came from the Andes, about 12,000 feet. All makes and models, every kind of potato you can think of. And what happened is the ships that came to South America brought back the potatoes to Europe, and then they eventually took them to America, North America also. But all potatoes that we eat today all came from the Andes.
The only thing that really comes from from America is corn.
Yeah,
The Indians have cultivated
it's really interesting how where everything came
that.
from.
And the apple trees and the pear trees and the peach trees were brought over from Europe also.
Yeah.
That was interesting.
Oh,
Okay, now we're talking. I think you're up there.
These changes, while resulting in cultural advances, produce certain biological retrogressions. During the previous hunting era, the superior tribes had intermarried with the higher types of war captives and had unvaryingly destroyed those whom they deemed inferior. But as they commenced to establish settlements and engage in agriculture and commerce, they began to save many of the mediocre captives as slaves. And it was the progeny of these slaves that subsequently so greatly deteriorated whole Cro-Magnon type. This retrogression of culture continued until it received a fresh impetus from the east when the final and ascetic invasion of the Mesopotamian swept over Europe, quickly absorbing the Cro-Magnon type of culture and initiating the civilization of the white races.
hmm.
All right. So, no matter what you think or what you say, most of us have a background of both the Adamites, the violet race, the blue race, the white races, right, and the black races. They have all intermixed with all the races. So, if you're prejudiced against any race, you got news for you. You have ancestors of that race in your bloodline. So, don't get too hotty-totty, as they say.
And that can be proven today if you take a
Yep.
test
That's right.
Yep.
by
That's right.
spitting in it or something else.
Yep.
That'll show up on 23andMe.
Yep. Okay. Am I up here?
Yes.
How
Okay.
far back does anybody really want to go?
Hmm.
I don't know. You know, we're all pretty much a
It's
mix.
pretty much a potpourri of.
Yeah, we're a mixture. We're Heinz 57s, all of us.
I always say, Mama had a good time.
Yep. The Andite invasions of Europe. While the Andes poured into Europe in a steady stream, there were 7 major invasions, the last arrivals coming on horseback in 3 great waves. Some entered Europe by the way of the islands of the Aegean and up the Danube Valley, but the majority of the earlier and purer strains migrated to northwestern Europe by the northern route across the grazing lands of the Volga and the Don.
Between the third and fourth invasions, a horde of Andinites entered Europe from the north, having come from Siberia by way of the Russian rivers and the Baltic. They were immediately assimilated by the northern Andite tribes.
Mixing, mixing, mixing.
The earlier expansions of the pure violet race were far more pacific than were those of their last semi-military and conquest-loving Andite descendants. The Adamites were pacific. The Nodites were, how do you pronounce that?
Belligerent.
Belligerent.
Belligerent. The union of these stocks as later mingled with the Sandic races produced the able, aggressive Andites who made actual military conquest.
All right, now y'all remember the Midwayers are sitting watching all this happen down through time. You know, they were here.
I was about to ask, how did they keep this history?
In their heads, because they're Midwayers, they don't forget, Roger. Not like humans. You know, they're not like humans. Everything they see and everything they hear, they remember.
Does it go into their DNA?
Yeah, it's a type of being they are. They're above human. They're between
Roger,
human.
will we be like that when we get to the mansion worlds and learn, our first language? We won't have to really work.
When we get our new bodies, we'll be exactly like that. We will learn and not forget. So,
Nice.
you know how many times I've told you I've read the Urantia book over the years? 40, 50, who knows how many times.
Yeah.
If I wait until I got to the mansion worlds, I could just read it once and remember all of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
You know, so
That's
what we
incredible. You remember all of it?
all of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had a professor at the University of South Florida that he was an ancient history professor, and he had a photographic memory. Anytime he read something, he remembered exactly where it was.
Oh,
Of course, not with every single thing, but he was extremely thorough.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. What I have trained myself to do and that to learn this stuff, I have to do it over and over and over again. But when I get to the mansion world, I won't have to do that anymore. So we're not that much of geniuses anyway. Okay, who's up here?
I think I am.
Okay.
But the horse was the evolutionary factor which determined the dominance of the Andites in the Occident. The horse gave the dispersing Andites the other two non-existent advantage of mobility, enabling the last groups of Andite cavalry men to progress quickly around the Caspian Sea to overrun all of Europe. All previous waves of Andites had moved so slowly that they tended to disintegrate at any great distance from Mesopotamia. But these later waves moved so rapidly that they reached Europe as the work groups still retaining some measure of higher culture.
So there you go. The horse is the key to the.
Well, I can sure understand that.
What was that?
I can understand that.
Yeah, it's the horse was the key to the movement of all these people, right?
And just to let you know, Roger, there is 9 sections.
Okay. I am not. Hang on just a minute. Let's try to get to section 6 tonight. So we'll do a few more slides that way. Okay?
That sounds good.
Is that all right with everybody?
That's really
Yeah, that's perfect.
All right.
The whole inhabited world outside of China and the Euphrates region had made very limited cultural progress for 10,000 years when the hard-riding Andite horsemen made their appearance in the 6th and 17th millennium before Christ. As they moved westward across the Russian plains, absorbing the best of the blue man and exterminating the worst, they became blended into one people. These were the ancestors of the so-called Nodites.
Nordic.
Nordic,
Nor-
excuse me, Nordic, pardon me, so-called Nordic races, the forefathers of the Scandinavian, German, and Anglo-Saxon peoples.
You know who they're talking about there, don't you? The Nordic people? That was the Vikings, right?
Yeah, the Balkans, that's what, yeah.
Yeah. It was not long before the superior blue strains had been fully absorbed by the Andites throughout all northern Europe. Well, I am tired tonight. Only in Lapland and to a certain extent in Brittany did older Andinites retain even a resemblance of identity.
Some
Lap-
of the sons.
Lapland, is that where everybody sits on everybody's lap?
I
No?
don't think so. I don't know where it is.
I don't either.
Hmm.
Millie, would you take the next one?
The Andite conquest of Northern Europe. The tribes of Northern Europe were being continuously reinforced and upstepped by the steady stream of migrants from Mesopotamia through the Turkestan, South Russian regions. And when the last waves of Andite cavalry swept over Europe, there were already more men with Andite inheritance in that region than were to be found in all the rest of the world. Whoa!
Yeah. Interesting.
They were rabbits.
Yep. Like rabbits.
For 3,000 years, the military headquarters of the Northern Andites was in Denmark. From the central point went forth the successive waves of conquest, which grew decreasingly Andite and increasingly white as the passing centuries witnessed the final blending of the Mesopotamia conquerors with the conquered peoples.
Okay, that's where most of the white races history came from, right? All right. Rodney, would you take the
Okay,
next one?
while the blue man had been absorbed in the north and eventually succumbed to the white cavalry raiders, who penetrated the south, the advancing tribes of the mixed white race met with stubborn and protracted resistance from the Cro-Magnons. But superior intelligence and ever-augmenting biologic reserves enabled them to wipe the older race out of existence.
So as they went through conquering and killing off other tribes, that's how they got rid of the remainder of the program. All right.
The decisive struggles between the white man and the blue man were fought out in the valley of Somme. Here the flower of the new races bitterly contested the southward moving Andites, and for over 500 years these Cro-Magnons successfully defended their territories before succumbing to the superior military strategy of the white invaders. Thor, the victorious commander of the armies of the north in the final battle of the Somme, became the hero of the northern white tribes and later on was revered as a god by some of them.
So he didn't come from another planet with a hammer.
Oh no, I think we did know. Hey, he looks good.
Okay, the strongholds of the Blue Man, which persisted longest, were in southern France. But the last great military resistance was overcome along the Somme. The later conquest progressed by commercial penetration, population pressure along the rivers, and by continued intermarriage with the superiors, coupled with the ruthless extermination of the inferiors. So if they considered inferior, they just killed them. Okay, Millie? Turn your mic back on, Millie.
And she stepped away.
Is she not there?
The picture's not on me.
Oh, okay. Well, Tim, would you take the next one?
When the tribal council of the Andite elders had adjudged an inferior captive to be unfed, he was by elaborate ceremony committed to the shaman priest, who escorted him to the river and administered the rites of initiation to the happy hunting grounds. Lethal submergence. In this way, the white invaders of Europe exterminated all peoples encountered who were not quite quickly absorbed into their own ranks, and thus did the blue man come to an end, and quickly.
So they take him to the river and drown him.
And drowned it.
Who's doing that again? The Andite?
The shaman's priest, yeah, they would,
Oh, the shaman priest.
yeah, they would take the Cro-Magnon blue man. They considered it inferior to the river and just drown him.
And what color were the shamans?
They were the white race.
Okay. Yeah, known as also medicine man.
Yep.
Millie's back.
Okay, Millie, would you take the next one, please? 5-7.
The Cro-Magnon,
Magnoid.
Yeah.
Magnet.
the Cro-Magnon blue man constituted the biological foundation of modern European races, but they have survived only as absorbed by the later and virile conquerors of the homelands, their homelands. The blue strain contributed many sturdy traits and much physical vigor to the white races of Europe. But the humor and the imagination of the blended European peoples were derived from the Andites. The humor, this Andite blue union, resulting in the northern white races, produced an immediate lapse of Andite civilization and a retardation of the transient nature. Eventually, the latent superiority of these northern barbarians manifested itself and culminated in present-day European civilization.
That's where most of the Europeans came from, right? Okay, and Rodney, would you take the last one?
Well, of course. By 5000 BC, the evolving white races were dominated throughout all of Northern Europe, including Northern Germany, Northern France, and the British Isles. Central Europe was for some time controlled by the blue man and the round-headed Andite. The latter were mainly situated in the Danube Valley and were never entirely displaced by the Andite.
Okay, so now you
Round-headed as opposed to long-headed.
That's right, round-headed as opposed to
Round-headed Andite.
And next week we will take the Andite on the night. Alright. Let's say a little prayer. And we'll close for the night. I'll close tonight. Father, thank you for this opportunity to share this wonderful revelation once again. Pray that you'll bless us in remembering this so we can share it with our friends and relatives, and share others and show them the pathway to you. That's our goal, is to teach them about the fatherhood of God and the brotherhood of man, like Jesus did. And we thank you for the opportunity to do this and share this and come together as friends. And we thank you for this opportunity. And your will be done in your Son's name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
And thank you for joining us for going. Please come see us next time. Next week. If we behave ourselves and can get in. Stop working so.
I've been thinking that I should